witchcraft, black magic, sorcery. To me, it's nothing but fairy tale mumbo jumbo.
Sure, I've made a few mistakes, but I've learned from them. I've learned.
I keep your secrets and you keep mine, okay?
We must be ready for a new danger.
Like a gigantic computer?
That's only part of the story.
Don't look so worried. It's going to be all right.
So there are two loose heads just floating around in here somewhere? Cruise.
And so...
Today on Truth and Soul Incorporated, we are talking to Andy Blood. Andy is originally from the UK, where, like most unemployed creatives, he spent several months living in a paper bag in a septic tank while looking for a job. After time at Rainey Kelly Campbell Roalfe, he headed over to New Zealand, where he worked at Saatchis in Auckland, Whybin TBWA, and also Colenso BBDO, doing some great work and getting himself 3 Cannes Grand Prix in the process. He spent time in Singapore at Beatties, and for the last 5 years has been at Facebook, doing whatever it is they get up to at Facebook. We had a great time reminiscing about David Walden, talking about where he sees the future of advertising, and also talking up his new book, which is apparently available at Amazon for a very reasonable price. Unlike me, Andy is irrepressibly enthusiastic about most things, and he also mentions NFTs a couple of times, which should get us the cashed up hipsters audience. He's a great fella, so have a listen.
You're listening to Truth
and Soul,
the New Zealand Advertising Podcast.
Okay, today on Truth and Soul Incorporated, we have Andy Blood. And Andy was one of the main ECDs when I started in New Zealand about 20 years ago. It was kind of the gang that existed back then. He's been a former world's #1 awarded ECD. He was ECD at Colenso for a while. Maybe best known as partner and ECD of TBWA for 9 years. And recently has spent the last 5 years working at Facebook. Now, we'll get on to that in a minute, but welcome, Andy.
Thank you, Paul.
We haven't seen each other for a long time. Partly, I don't actually know why not, because we've kind of been in the same universe for a while. But Andy, where did it go wrong? I mean, where did it start to go right? Where are you from?
Where am I from? I was born in...
Organised chaos, that's the way we run.
I was born in Stockport. So a Manchester lad. So I support Man United because I'm one of the Mancunians who lives away from the city. So you support...
Yeah, I never knew you were a Man.
Yeah, you're a Man U fan if you don't live in Manchester, and you're a Man City fan if you live in Manchester. So grew up in Derbyshire, beautiful town called Buxton, the Peak District. Rolling hills, sheep, woods, forest... home of the famous Buxton Mineral Water, an opera house, and left Buxton to go to Durham University and studied economics, and left with an economics degree in 1989 and was destined for the Bank of England. I was on my 3rd interview at the Bank of England to go and work as some kind of trader, I think, from memory.
That's a lucky escape.
Yeah. So that is the where did it go wrong, where did it go right moment. I could have spent the last 20 years in the city, which could have been
and be considerably richer and more miserable,
and probably wouldn't be here. Yeah. And 1989, December 89, I was on my 3rd interview at the Threadneedle Street, and my father passed away, and I was 22, and that was a pivotal moment, and I thought, do I really want to spend the rest of my life in a bank, in finance, in the city? And made a change that day or the morning after my father's passing, and applied for Watford College copywriting course. And
why? Because I understand why you bereavement.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Might cause you to reappraise your life, but why go, copywriting?
Yeah, my father was a musician and he'd traveled the world, had an amazing life, and he died age 46, so incredibly young.
Wow.
And I remember thinking, what can I do to give me the life that he had, given that I've only got 1/10 of the talent he had. I wasn't going to make it as a muso. I probably wasn't going to travel the world that way. But I thought, advertising, commercials, film, they seem to have a really similar kind of remit, really similar life. So I can probably do that. So I set my sights on getting into advertising, actually, as the closest thing I could imagine to being a rock star and following in Dad's footsteps.
What was there a conversation with someone that led you to that?
No, that was all internalized dialogue.
Yeah.
I'd had a good mate, Danny Brooke Taylor, from the same school, who went to Watford, I think a year prior. So there was, I had knowledge about this, the industry and a semblance of how to get into it. And another schoolmate, John Weston, did similar, and he ended up at Hal Henry. So I think it's quite weird that three of us from one little college in Buxton sort of earmarked the same path. And
So I was just going to say, for those who are not English, Watford was the kind of the premier school. It was the only school of copywriting in the UK for some time. When you think of a country of 60 million people, we had one, whereas in New Zealand now we've got a few within 5 million.
Yeah, and I think Watford was preeminent. You're right. It was copy based. It was Watford was also the centre of the printing industry, so the newspaper industry, and the hot metal type industry. So I think it made sense for all those things to be to share the same geography. I think outside Watford, if you had a kind of creative bone, then you could have a look at artistically. You might think of St Martin's. I think Falmouth had a course. There were 2 or 3 courses for the more artistically minded, but Watford seemed to be the one for people with words. Could ply their trade.
Yep. So you had a good time there?
Yeah, really enjoyed it. Yeah, really enjoyed it. I think hilariously didn't graduate. It was a year-long course, and that was really because we got a bite of a cherry. We got a month placement at McCann, followed by a month placement.
Who is we?
Richard Beesling. He was my original partner. We met at interview. We met on the course. We teamed up within week 1 or week 2. Stayed together for 8 years and did the rounds of the streets of London together. Schlepping your book around, cold calling creatives and creative directors, and we got a placement at McCann. Followed that up with a placement at BMP.
Who was the creative director at McCann in those days?
Jerry Green.
If you can remember.
Jerry Green was the CD or the boss of creative. I think he was famous for the famous long-running Nescafe Gold Blend soap opera, that had been on TV for several years by then and was quite the thing, And I think under Jerry, we were taken under the wing of Jan Mesdag, who had recently been at GGT and famously written "Get Your Gums Off My Poppadoms" as one of the brilliant commercials that came out of GGT, and they used an Indian Elvis, Pet Elvis, as one of the famous commercials of the time. And Jan took Richard and I under his wing and made sure that we had good briefs, good things to work on, and we had.
I was at McCann's. At the time, from memory, McCann's didn't have it was a job, which was a great start, didn't have a great creative reputation in London.
Yeah, it was a job. Yeah, and 1991 was the Great Recession of its time, the post,
remember it well.
The bubble of the 80s had well and truly burst. So, the glamour of advertising already, had gone and was replaced by, the cold, dark recession of the early 90s. And I think we were... After McCann, we went to BMP. We had a placement there. They just merged with DDB. They didn't have room to take us or didn't have money to take us at the time. We were there under Steve Reeves and Paul Gay, who were amazing. Frank Budgeon was there. Pete Gatley was there. That was amazing. But it was McCann who came to the table with an offer, so we took it. And spent a year at McCann. And again, the cold the cold, chill wind of recession blew again, and we lost our first job in advertising. So we made redundant in 92, spent a year on the streets, on the dole, working lots of jobs and, doing the round and building portfolios until we got...
Just for Eddie, just for the guys listening who are maybe starting out in advertising or thinking, and I know we sound like a couple of Monty Python Yorkshiremen discussing
shoebox in Middle
discussing
Road.
How, but it was pretty tough in those days. It was there was a lot. A team that Mike O'Sullivan and I were at college with, who spent 3 years looking to get a job. There's a lot of time spent sleeping on sofas and going from agency to agency in the rain with portfolio under your arm.
Absolutely that. Yeah. I was at university with, a whole load of people who studied tax, accounting, law, you name it. And very quickly they went straight into graduate programs, and within 3 or 4 years were earning a really good whack. But if you took the path into advertising, then pretty much you were just destined to several years of placements, if you were lucky, 50 quid a week if you were lucky, and days, weeks, months, years of schlepping around hard A2 portfolios in the cold and unforgiving streets of London. Absolutely. Yeah, a very depressing time, and it got to a lot of people. And I think one option at the time, because things were quite limited then, London seemed to be the epicenter of the advertising universe. And if you couldn't make it there, a few friends went to Hong Kong, a few to Singapore. And I do remember the well-known acronym of the time, FILTH, which was fucked up in London, try Hong Kong. And it was, the label for people who couldn't get a job in the UK and had to go to, Hong Kong or Singapore or any other non-UK country was pretty bitter when you think about it, pretty cynical.
Yeah. I remember that for sure. I think things have changed a lot now, but it was London or nothing in those days.
Yeah, absolutely. And we were really lucky that there was an entire wave, recessions seem to be the catalyst for these things. And there was an entire wave of new agencies all starting up, so you had your Hal Henrys and you had your St. Luke's, and then Rainey Kelly Campbell Roalfe came along, and then Mother. And we were really lucky that Tim Hearn and Kate Stanners, who were running GGT, gave us a tip off or put our names in front of Jim Kelly, who'd set up Rainey Kelly Campbell Roalfe. And, that one generous act changed our careers. Richard and I went to spend a weekend working on a pitch for Rainey Kelly. One thing led to another. The agency had no headquarters at the time. 3 or 4 months later, it did, and pretty soon we were through the door, and we were working on pitch after pitch after pitch. We were helping to build a startup. We were doing really good work for really big clients, really quickly. 5 years ahead of what we would have been doing had we taken a path through 3 big agencies. So we landed on our feet in a really lucky way to get into a startup that was building great clients who wanted to do great work. And, all of a sudden,
And they were nice guys too.
Yeah, great people, really great people. And it's extraordinary looking back that we spent 5 years there as that agency grew. And they were great people. The clients were great people, and the work was really, really great. And and we then managed.
So you left, obviously.
We accelerated through that. We managed to get through the years of the sort of 50 quid a week placement up to some kind of decent living wage. It took about 5 years, I think.
So why did you leave?
I left for love. I was in 1998, 5 years at Rainey Kelly. There had been a very large influx of Kiwis into my life, and I was living in Maida Vale in a house full of Kiwis, And one thing led to another. I fell in love with a young Kiwi lass. And in 1998, we decided to swap sides. Exchange one side of the planet for the other. And destined for New Zealand we were. And arrived in September 1998.
There's three coincidences between us. I used to live in Maida Vale for a bit. I spent some time working at Rainey Kelly Campbell Roalfe, though then it was Y&R, and I also immigrated to New Zealand. So how did you get a job down here before you left the UK, or were you searching around down here?
It's bizarre. It's funny when you think about that, Paul, because we hadn't even met, had we? Given those coincidences, we didn't meet until you were here. I think.
Sorry, Richard was still at Y&R Rainey Kelly, was he not?
Yes, he stayed for another few years. Yeah.
I think I might have met him.
Yeah, we picked up our first Gold Lion in 97. We were incredibly put on the board of Rainey Kelly, age 30, in about 1998, and given a small shareholding. Incredible when you look back. That these things can happen. We made it onto Campaign's Faces, Campaign every year did its Faces to Watch sort of issue, and we made it into that as being the creative team you must watch. And almost at that exact moment, I chose to give it all up, and my sights were set on New Zealand. So I came over here in March 98, had a look around. In advance of that, I got a list of contacts of Malcolm Pointer, actually, funnily enough, who was coming the other way. So he just landed in the UK from New Zealand. He just got a job at BBH. I met Malcolm in Soho. We had a beer. He gave me his contact lists. And I ended up reaching out to Kim Thorpe, Saatchis Wellington, John McCabe at Campaign Palace, and then others such as Martin Brown, who were at Walker's. And I think such was the power of things like Lurtz's archive in those days, because you would see great work from all over the world. So you could very quickly go, okay, who's behind that work? You can make a little list. You can approach those people. And when I got here on a 2 to 3 week holiday, I made my little list. So I called McCabe and we caught up. Kim Thorpe put me in touch with the Saatchis Auckland people, and we caught up. I rang Mike O, actually out of the blue. That
was a mistake.
While I was here, I'd seen the work, and I asked around who's doing that work, and people said, "Oh, it's Mojo doing that. You want to speak to Mike?" So I rang Mike, and then went to see Martin Brown. So yes, it was Saatchis who, on my return, put an offer on the table. So in July, I accepted an offer. I was really lucky, as these things are. Timing tends to determine everything. Andrew Tinning was, his career was in the ascendant. He was working with Gordon Clark. Gordon had resigned. Gordon was going to Y&R. Andrew had a vacant seat the same week that my book landed. And I got lucky. Andrew and I flew back in July. Andrew and I clicked. We went fishing and caught my first snapper, and which became my first ever Facebook profile photo, as you do or did back then. And
it's funny, there was a big fishing mafia back then.
There was an absolute fishing mafia. Fishing. People were fishing mad. Yeah. I couldn't believe it, because I know you're a big fan, and Mike O's a big fan, and it was all new to me. But Tinning was a huge fan, and would spend any moment he could on the water. John McCabe was a huge fan and just wanted to be out there all the time. And I landed in spring, so September, and we spent a lot of time on the water. There was barely a week went by that we weren't somewhere out there catching fish. And that was an extraordinary turn of events for
It's strange, like London being all about pubs and Friday night going out in Soho. You come to New Zealand and it's all about going fishing, and the Poms like you, me, and Mike and various others who came down here seem to adapt to it very quickly.
It couldn't have been more different. You know, Soho had its glamour. I think, you know, the Groucho was very hip then because it was full of people like, you know, Britpop was taking off or had already taken off. And so was the art scene. So the Groucho was full of Blur, people from Blur. It was full of people from the young British art scene, the Hearst crowd. Soho was really taking off in that hip, vibrant, you know, cultural way that has come to define the last couple of decades. And you're right, over here.
It was the new lad.
Yeah, and over here, and Loaded had come out. Yeah, the new lad scene was taking off. Football was enormous. And then it couldn't have been more different on the other side of the world where, as you know, all people wanted to do was go fishing. Absolutely. Yeah. And I was absolutely out of my depth in that environment. Absolutely. You and I went out. I remember we went out with Mike O. One must have been around the millennium, I think.
Yeah.
Actually.
Yeah. Been a few of those trips.
I got really lucky, and I landed with Andrew Tinning, who is as Kiwi as you can get, and he's the salt of, you know, he's a real good Kiwi lad. He's salt of the earth. He's from Greymouth or Blackball, via Christchurch, and I think
he now lives in Perth.
And I think my London edges were soon knocked off. And
so it was okay for you, the kind of the transfer of mentality of the budget and the way that London operated. Yeah, you had no trouble fitting in with the Kiwi way.
Yeah, it was certainly different. I think because I come from big agencies with big budgets and big structures, I would have found the whole thing more disruptive, more of a shock. But because I just spent 5 years in a startup where, you know, you had to get your hands dirty, you had to do everything. You know, if a job needed doing, you had to do it. You know, big or small, and that's any job in the agency. You had to do it in a startup, and that was very much like the New Zealand way, which is when you're in, you are in an agency and you do have to do everything. And I think the big change all of a sudden was you're not just doing brand. You know, you're not just doing the glory stuff. You're doing all the point of sale. You're doing all the promotion. You're doing all the retail, and sometimes doing the brand work. You know, but I think that was the shaping of me as a creative, in that we could, and thanks to people like Andrew, we could always find a way to get the ideas out, because there were a million different ways of shaping the idea. You know, because you were doing so much of the remit of the brand in the business, you could always find a way to get the ideas out. So I think, I fell into something that I was quite happy to fall into, and it suited my style. And I think by not focusing on things that were glossy and shiny and big budget, I think we found a way to put great ideas, you know, onto the street or into the world in whatever fashion we could, you know. And it was the, Kiwi ingenuity. It was really that. If there was a way, we would make the way, and we would make it happen. And so my 5 years with Andrew probably determined the rest of my career, really, in the sense that, you learn how to make everything happen, you know.
Yes. Yeah. No, I personally, I absolutely appreciated that myself. It was you. If you wanted something to happen, you had to go and do it. Whereas in London, you just went, if you were lucky, you went, well, here's an idea, and get people running around you to sort it. Down here, you had to do the lot. So you had 5 good years at Saatchis, got some decent work out, got your feet under the New Zealand table, and then went to TBWA?
No, I went, I took a detour to Singapore. There was a job going at Beatty, and out of the blue, I heard from Andrew Stone, and also I heard who else from Peter Moore. Peter Moore and Andrew Stone both contacted me about a job that was going at Beatty, and I think there was a finder's fee in it for them. And there was the job in Singapore looking after Ian Beatty's agency, a regional role as chief creative officer. And I threw my hat in the ring for that, and flew up to Singapore and interviewed, etc. And I got it. So I went from being deputy CD with Andrew at Saatchis to being regional chief creative officer of the Beatty Network, which at the time was a network serving Singapore Airlines with an office anywhere from Sydney to Singapore to Shanghai to Taiwan. It was extraordinary. It was in 12 to 13 countries across Asia. And the key account being Singapore Airlines, but we had many others: Singapore Tourist Board, Mercedes-Benz, some of the banks, etc. So that was a really different time. Yeah, that was incredibly different too.
How did you enjoy working in Asia?
Oh, I loved it. I loved Singapore. Some really amazing times, some really amazing adventures, some great mates. It was fucking hard. Working for Ian Beatty, as everybody will attest, is challenging. And you quickly find out that Ian is not so much the chairman of his own agency, he's also, in effect, the creative chairman of his own agency. So it doesn't matter that he hires a CCO, he's going to tell you what the work's all about. And it's Ian's way.
I know the type.
Yeah. And I like Ian, and you can like somebody as a person, even though they can be challenging as a business partner. But nobody lasted long at Beatty. I think Neil French famously lasted 6 to 8 weeks. I think if you lasted 6 months, that was considered tenure. And there is a saying: as soon as you start at Beatty, someone fires a gun, and it's only a matter of time before the bullet catches up with you. And I made 18 months. I made 18 months to 2 years. But it did what it needed to do for me. At 30, I made a pact with myself that I would be creative director by 36. At 36, I was chief creative officer, so I hit my goals. I'd been a regional CCO. All of a sudden, I'd been, working in a completely different way to anything I'd been used to. But then one Saturday morning in Singapore, got a phone call out of the blue. It happened to be David Walden. We hadn't met. I didn't know DeVo at the time. He was known as Waldo at the time. This was before his transition to DeVo. So I didn't know Waldo. He was famous. He ran TBWA. He'd worked with Matt Kemsley and previously Gary Horn, and previously Lishy. I didn't know any of... Oh, no, Lishy and I got to know each other at Saatchis. Andrew Tinning and I hired Andy Lish. So we spent 2 years working together, more or less as a twosome come threesome. And it was Lishy who tipped DeVo off. Lishy said to DeVo, they were great mates. If you're looking for a new CD, you should try Andy. He's up in Singapore. Yeah. He's probably had enough of Ian by now, and he might be willing to come back. And on a Saturday, I got a call out of the blue, and it was DeVo. And then, funny how things work out, we were flying to Perth for a family holiday. And that just happened to get us into a closer time zone. I flew from Perth to Melbourne to meet Scott Whybin, to have an interview, which really was lunch. Fly back to Perth the same day, continue the holiday, etc. And that was that. By the end of the year, left Singapore, flew back to Whybin's to take over DeVo's agency, which I really didn't know anything about. Again, it was a small agency, about startup size. I think was famous for Goldstein at the time, which had really just broken.
ASB,
So I think Goldstein was in sort of maybe year 2, maybe year 3. It was putting DeVo's agency on the map, and that's when I landed. 2004.
For those of you, just in case anyone's listening is not familiar with DeVo, he was a large man in all respects. Great character, always fun to be around. Sadly died a few years ago, but he was a big part of the advertising scene down here.
DeVo, without a doubt, one of the greatest human beings that you could ever want to meet, spend time with, and for me, have as a business partner. Absolutely incredible human being. And he would light up any room he was in. He would have such a way with clients. He had such a way with people. Hospitality was really his thing. Being a hospitable host, making everybody feel welcome, and charming clients, and making them feel that he cared more for their business than they did, and he cared more for them personally than their families did. And DeVo just wanted to do great work. He really wanted his agency, his baby, to be responsible for doing great work. His mantra was do great work, make money, have fun. And on occasion, the agency would do one of those things. Sometimes it would manage two of those things. Certainly when I was getting that, when I arrived, the agency was making money and it was having fun, but it was probably not really doing great work. And but I was there for 9 years, but certainly over the next 5 years, we really did hit the straps of those three. We made money, we had fun, we did great work. And we had an extraordinary run of doing work that changed the way that people would often shape their ideas, or even what could be an idea, or how you would go to market with an idea. We had an extraordinary run with Adidas and the NZRU and the All Blacks for 9 years. Year in, year out, we sort of changed the game with that relationship.
And 2 degrees.
And then, ASB got stronger and stronger and became, the most successful financial campaign in the country, judged by the people and the Effies, many, many years running. And then later 2 degrees became the most successful third entrant telco launch anywhere in the world. And by third entrant, that means, the challenger that comes in to disrupt the incumbent duopoly, which at the time was Telecom and Vodafone. So we really had 8 or 9 years of extraordinary success. And it was a roller coaster, and like many things, it did come to an end. And I think the GFC was a large part of that, in the way that, the GFC shook every industry to its knees. And
for sure.
And I do remember DeVo saying, this recession will force feed the digital agenda. And it did. And many, many industries were irrevocably shaken and changed and never really recovered from the seismic events of the GFC, newspapers, media, you name it.
It didn't cause a digital revolution. It accelerated it, I guess is what he's saying.
Yeah, the second half of the 2000s, agencies were getting really good at digital. They were either developing the talent or they were buying the talent, merging with digital shops. Agencies got really good at building their own digital solutions. And so, yes, the trend was apparent, but it was accelerated. Yeah. And so was the destruction of the margins of the business, across the board. Across the board, whatever you could afford to do before the GFC, you couldn't afford to do it afterwards. In any way that resembled the way that you might have done it before.
Yeah. So you left BBWA and went to Colenso?
Yeah, I left TBWA after 9 years, and it was time for a change. And I think, I left willingly and voluntarily, and with 6 months' notice to give myself the best possible chance of, leaving good people on board before I made my exit. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, but I needed to change what I was doing and the way I was doing it. And within a year, I think within less than a year, within 6 months or within a year at least, I was contracting at Colenso, which later became a permanent gig for 2 to 3 years, working with Wertho and Garrett, and which was extraordinary. It was a career highlight to go and work with someone like Nick, Wertho, having admired his work for so long, and it was a case of, I was willing to actually go and work under someone else to go and do that, to have that opportunity. And had an extraordinary...
Just in case of someone who's very, very young, that's Nick Worthington, who's another bloody POM who came down here and had massive success at Colenso.
Yeah, another one. Yeah, it's Nick's BBH connection, which, McCabe and the guys had also been at BBH but had returned. And I think Hegarty being the connection there between lots of those guys, because I think John Hegarty's got his own sort of fondness for, New Zealand and his many trips down here.
Yeah.
And Nick had just, been into Mojo, done amazing work. He moved over to Colenso, continued doing amazing work in the same way that he was doing amazing work in the UK. And he was, his Levi's work in particular will always stand up there as being some of the best work that you might ever want to have on your own reel if you could. And went to Colenso, had an extraordinary time for 3 years. Did some really great work. Got very fortunate with timing. It's the right briefs with the right people with the right clients on the right day, and you can make it happen. Left Colenso with another Grand Prix, and that made 3, having picked up two at TBWA. Made the triple.
What were the 3? Sorry, Andy. What were your 3 Grand Prix?
There was one 2007. We bagged 2. So we won for Adidas, NZRU, and All Blacks for the Bonded by Blood campaign, and one was for ASB Bank, and that was for the launch of Pago, which was the world's first digital wallet. Incredible, really. Back in 2006-07, and a few years later at Colenso, we launched a new platform for DB, and we did the Brutrolian campaign, which was an extraordinary idea, to turn the byproduct of the brewing process into a biofuel that people the length and breadth of the country could buy and fill up their cars with. And it was amazing that you could get on the gas one night with your mates, and then the very next day, the byproduct of that could be filling up the car. And
you went to, in a sense, you went to the enemy after that, because generally seen that the tech giants have, maybe not exactly dancing on the grave of advertising, but they've certainly diverted a lot of the budget.
Well, it was certainly the frenemy, and it was noticeable that there had begun to be a drift, that people I knew of and respected and had done amazing work in their advertising careers, one by one, were moving over to Silicon Valley. And Andrew Keller, who everybody would know really the work of Crispin Porter, and Andrew Keller and friends working for Alex Boguski had done extraordinary work through the late 90s and the 2000s. And Andrew, just ahead of me, 6 months before maybe, had moved over to Facebook. And I'd had really good friends that had moved over to Google. And it just seemed to be, a movement was beginning. And I was pretty bored with advertising at the time. It just felt like every room I'd walked in, I'd had the same conversation thousands of times. And, it didn't really matter who the clients were. I'd done the categories, I'd done the clients, I'd had the conversations, we'd done the work. We'd done everything we could, and it was Groundhog Day. And I really needed to be challenged in a new way. And I made a list. I made a short list, maybe 10 agencies and businesses long, which I cut down to 5. And I gave myself 6 months. And I went through that list. And I had 40 interviews in 6 months. And for me, it came down to RGA was on that list. And I really liked the kind of thing they were doing. And it really came to, and I had 8 interviews at RGA all the way up to Nick Law. And it really came down to I would go to RGA or I would go to Facebook, because out of all those 40 interviews, the only conversations that were different were in those two businesses. So for me, it had to be one or the other, and the role had to be one flight from New Zealand. So it had to be San Francisco, Sydney, or Singapore. And at the time, I think RGA they had a role in New York, but that was 2 flights and it was just too far. And Facebook had a role in Sydney. Rebecca Carrasco, who I really rate, had just gone into the job, and there was a role going, and I applied for the Sydney role at Facebook. And 12 interviews later, got the gig. And then spent the next 5 years
online interviews, or you went over there a few times?
I did go there, but all my interviews actually during the process were remote. And it was, this was 5.5 years ago. So this was my first induction to living online in video meetings, working remotely and presenting to people simultaneously. And, I was sitting in New Zealand, but I was having interviews in Sydney, Shanghai, and Singapore, all with the same people, all within the same interview. And that's common now, but it's quite radical then. And one of the first obstacles at Facebook, or at the time, you were given a hack, you were given 5 days to respond to a brief, and then you would present the work back to 3 people in 3 different roles in 3 different countries simultaneously. And everything about it was different. And I really enjoyed it. It was really hard. It was really a different way of working. It was more strategic. It was really stretching the mind. And I actually didn't think I would make a year. It was that hard, but I stayed for 5. And went from being
what kind of briefs? Sorry, Andy. What kind of briefs did you get? Give me an example of the kind of stuff.
My first brief, which was actually destined for Rich Maddox. My last ever brief before Facebook was to film New Zealand in 360 degrees. And that brief was destined for Rich, but Rich had left his own agency and gone to Shine. And that was literally a job that I finished conceptually before going into Facebook, but then took over executionally as I arrived at Facebook. So my first job was shooting New Zealand in 360 degrees with an $800 camera. So that was unique in the sense that it broke the production paradigm of anything that I'd been used to before. It was mobile first. It was using a technology that was untested, and we were really the proving ground as to whether you could do that or not. And we did manage to do it. And the work was very respectable and convincing that you could shoot an entire country with a $800 camera, and then use that work for all your global audiences who are consuming your work on mobile. So mobile. So
the briefs were like it was treating Facebook as an advertising agency.
Yeah, I think my first few briefs were like that, but that didn't set the way that things would be. Yes, you're right. But the first few briefs I did were very much like Facebook has an in-house agency. Here comes the brief. Facebook is also the platform. Facebook is also where the audience is. And the next brief was Nestle and Uncle Toby, a straight video campaign, mobile first. My very next brief was extraordinary. It was for, and this is what I thought my Facebook life was going to be like. It was for Chevrolet, and they were the naming rights sponsors for Man U. And the brief went to a CD in Singapore who I met in San Francisco, who happened to share the brief with me. I was from Manchester. I was a Man U fan. And I said to Dewey, the CD, look, I'm flying back to New Zealand tonight. By the time I get off the plane, I'll give you a campaign. And I did that. And I literally got off the plane, emailed the campaign creative to Juhi. I was back in Sydney. Juhi was in Singapore. The client was in Detroit. The advertising asset was in Manchester, and the audience was going to be in Asia and South America. And all of a sudden, I actually had that moment of, wow, this is what my future creative life is going to be. Joining all these global dots, but the pursuit of the work is the same. But the audience is global, and it doesn't really matter where we are. We can all connect with each other in the pursuit of the work. And we flew to Manchester. We worked with a production crew from the UK, and we filmed Old Trafford in 360. And we're the first people to do so, to give people the experience of what it was like to actually step out onto the hallowed turf, even though these people would be having that experience in either Asia or South America, but then would win the chance to win that experience, to go and experience that for themselves for real. It was one of those money can't buy experiences that somebody like Chevrolet could offer at the time.
Yeah. So basically, because I don't know how because I don't like. So you went to Facebook, or Rebecca did, and Matt and Dave went to Google. To me, that was a black hole. I got no idea what you guys were doing. But it sounds like you had clients were going to Facebook, or Facebook was going to clients and going, okay, we're going to do a campaign to run on Facebook. So you were basically running as Facebook's internal advertising agency.
Yeah, we were, and it was often it would be client briefs would come direct, either from client or media partner, and go, look, nobody understands your platform like you. Therefore, you should probably do the creative work to make sure it's executed the right way. You'll know the right people to use who are going to execute it the right way. And you've also got the global reach in the audience base to make this a success. So almost end-to-end solution, brief to thinking to execution to audience to results. Now that did seem to be how things might be. It wasn't really how things worked out often, and it's certainly not how things seem to work out now. But it was very much, I think for my first year, 2016-17, it did work that way a lot. I got a lot of work like that was direct to Facebook, either from client or media or some external party. It wouldn't always be the way. I think there was a shift in Facebook not to challenge existing agency relationships. I think Facebook understood that actually it could never scale its own offering to compete with the advertising industry itself in any market. So the only formula for Facebook to succeed was to partner with the people that are already doing it well in market and actually build up advocacy, build up education, build up relationships in market by partnering with agencies. So there was a pivot. My first year didn't resemble years 3, 4, 5, and 6. I then spent the next 2 years working actually for Andrew Keller, but solely Andrew ran the global agency and global accounts department in Facebook. So I was specifically given BBDO as a remit. Look after BBDO, look after their accounts, help them use Facebook in the right way, help them do the very best work they can on our platform for their clients. So we actually moved to a partnership model. And
did you ever come across Sheryl Sandberg's theory that online advertising, film online advertising, should all be 7 seconds long?
No, I didn't.
Okay, all right.
No, I didn't.
All right, okay. I'm going to
No, I think there are many stereotypes and tellings of the stories of and rules that have all been passed, on over the years or passed down to various partners about what you should and what you shouldn't do to succeed on the platforms. And the real shame about that is that lots of principles became seen as rules, and those rules were handed to agencies and partners as almost like a rule book for success on the Facebook platform. And creative people don't like being given the rules for success. You know, the creative mind needs to find the formula for success itself. That's the creative endeavor. Creative people, you know, bar none, hate being told what to do. And you cannot go to a creative department and tell them how to behave. And it was unfortunate that, you know, many of my interactions with partners and creative people was actually spent undoing the myths and undoing the rules and helping people see that actually good principles are good principles. But actually, the only way to go and succeed here is to experiment, try many different things, you know, be as wild as you can be, or be as conservative as you might want to be. It's up to you, but try lots of things to find out what's going to work for you. And you will often find that your own recipe for success can be counter to the principles, or can be counter to what previously people saw as rules. You know, I've had great successes with long form content on the platform when rules tell you that 3 seconds and 6 seconds are the order of the day. You know, I can give you case study after case study that proves people will watch long form content and communication on platforms. You know,
Absolutely.
But you've just got to find out.
You've
just got to find out what works for you. But it is the case that, you know, people's behavior changes daily, and depending what behavior state they're in, there are times when they're just gonna, you know, if they're grazing on their phones, then all they're gonna have time for is fast burn content. You know, if they're interacting with stuff, then that's the time to serve them interactive work. And if they're actually, you know, leaning back or leaning into a long form session, then yes, they will be responsive to long form work in those moments. That portfolio of behaviors exists in everybody. And global aggregate behaviors will reinforce that. You know, the data will reinforce that. You know, and you need to prepare work that serves each of those behaviors. You can't just narrowly define it as one of them only. It can't just be short form only, even though short form is super important. You know, it can't be long form only because, you know, a lot of our time short form is necessary, you know, but devices are equally interactive, and you actually need to play to people's desire to interact with things. So you need to create for, you know, the creative mind needs to furnish ideas in campaigns that respond to each of those circumstances or behaviors. You know, the short, the long, the interactive, you know, but it's got to be fucking interesting because it's gladiatorial, you know?
Yeah, I think the interesting, well, the number of
interesting or useful, because you don't, you know, if something useful comes along and you need that usefulness, then you will go for it, you know?
Absolutely. I'm forever looking at videos on how to change tap washers and, you know, put up shelves. And,
yeah, me too.
That kind of stuff. So what do you see as the future it's for advertising agencies or advertising as a career, how it's going to change?
I do remember when I...
Okay, thank you, Andy.
Yeah. I do remember when I was having all those interviews with Nick Law, and this is 6 years ago, that he had a point of view which there was going to be a big shake-up, and the agencies were going to, after the shake-up, they would resemble narrative boutiques. Because by and large, every single function of an agency, bar the narrative function, could probably be done just as well elsewhere. But the thing that agencies really did do well and still tend to do better is the pure creative work.
Yeah.
So I do think agencies need to play to that strength more. I think agencies, in the pursuit of growth, have done and will always continue to try and grab every piece of a business to make itself profitable and useful. But I think the truth of it is, in doing so, agencies can't sustain that amount of overhead with the income they're receiving from clients. I think agencies have to, get sharper with what they're good at, and just keep the preeminence of what they're good at, and accept that other people are doing other things just as well, if not better.
Well, the margins that agencies work on are coming down in every single respect, in terms of media, in terms of production, in terms of strategy. So the whole bit, I mean, you talk about, I don't like to use the phrase content creation, but what was the phrase you used? Making narratives.
Narrative boutique. And I just mean that in terms of, storytelling boutique, or at least control. Controlling the brand narrative is what agencies are often good at, or defining the brand narrative, or setting the brand narrative, which all the other partners have to fall in step with, defining what it is about a brand that we find most compelling. Or the agencies can make most compelling, the big idea, most compelling for us in the way that they take these, brand stories to market. Yeah,
the big idea. So that's almost, almost a creative strategy, if you like. And the issue with creative strategy is that agencies basically gave strategy away for free, because they in the old days anyway, they'd make it up on production. Production budgets have come down so much that there's nothing left for that. And if you're not charging for strategy, because strategy is a really hard thing to charge for, because how do you gauge an idea? Is it gauge a $1 million idea or a $10 idea? Very difficult to tell.
Yeah,
very difficult to charge for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel for agencies in the modern age, and my daughter works in one. I know how hard people work, and I know how much people care, and I know how much people desire to do the best work they can for clients under the most extraordinarily difficult circumstances. Are they being paid enough to hire the best people to do their best job? Can people even survive in this industry to do the great work necessary? Can they make ends meet? When every single person in the agency is being thrashed.
Are the best people going to work in advertising?
Well, it's a great question. It's a bit like, I think we began our careers in advertising, and I'm sure for similar reasons, which is, advertising is where the audiences were. And if you wanted to do work that everybody saw, then you needed to go and work in an agency, and you needed to do the TV, the print, and the outdoor that everybody saw. So, mass media, seen by everybody, and the cultural stories that were shared to everybody were from the creative department in advertising agencies. And work was creative work was the talking point of the playground, of the pub, of conversation, of people meeting, and people just, advertising was a dynamic part of the popular culture. So it really was. So therefore, it was a magnet for talent.
And you got paid well in the days, but I
eventually
agree
eventually you got paid well.
Oh yes, yeah. You started off on 50 quid a week, but there were, once you got up the chain, there were certainly the 80s. There were people earning very decent money for coming up with daft ideas. And as you say, I think that's very important, that advertising was a deep part of the culture. Certainly in the UK, it was a water cooler conversations. It was schoolyard conversations. It was dinner party conversations, and it was a great outlet for creativity. If we take you weren't good enough to be a professional musician. I wasn't good enough to be a professional writer, but hey, you had some outlet for your creativity. You could do your best to show people what you could do and have fun doing it in advertising agencies. And I'm not sure that's the case anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. We could make those 30-second dramas. We could make those 30-second skits. We could make the things that lit up the conversation. And we're part of we're part of the culture. Back in a time when people would often remark, the ads are better than the programs. And that was everybody knew that. That was that was just the way it was. And if you wanted to be a part of that, then you would go and do your damned hardest to get a job in an agency, which is why we all slogged it out for years, years of low pay and hard work just to get the briefs, to finally get the chance to do the work that everybody would see. And advertising has lost its position as being the conduit to the mass market. We don't anymore have a shared reality. All people in a country or in a group or in a community will not see the same things, and all people will not remark upon the same things, and all people will not carry around the same stories and images and songs and jokes, in their heads in a way that we're used to. And so it's much harder to determine. It's much harder to even see, is great work being made, or if it is, who's seeing it? And if we're all seeing different things, then we don't know. But what we are all seeing now is we all see the same content on Netflix, or we all see the same content on Neon or HBO, or we all see, great skits on TikTok, or we all see the same memes across various other platforms. So we have different shared realities now. And I think the attraction for people who want to make work or want to be creative and share that work with an audience, and you probably are going to go and find the outlet for that somewhere else. And that...
Okay, well, so we have turned into the two Yorkshiremen. It were better, we had it tough, but it was fun. But what are you going to do now, Andy?
It's still fun, but it's fun in a different way. Do you know what I mean? You can still, technology means we can make anything at our tabletops. We can film anything within a couple of hours, and we can do it ourselves, or we can do it with willing comrades. You can make stuff really quickly, and it can be funny, and it can be really good, and you can find an audience, and you can get satisfaction that goes with it, and you can build up a career. I think creativity is flourishing in a very different way, and it can still be really satisfying and really rewarding, but in different ways. I think if you're trying to apply that trade as a creative in an agency, then it's fucking hard. Do you know what I mean? People often do remark, there's never been a better time to have an idea, because the distance between you and your audience has never been shorter. And yes, I agree with that wholeheartedly. That's absolutely true. Now, it's also, there's never been a more challenging time to have an idea, because everything is now so fucking complex. So we have a really, really, there's a real tension between, yes, it's never been easier. Yes, it's never been more fucking complex. And
well, it's never been easier to make music, but it's almost never been harder to get anyone to listen to it, because you can make music easily, and you can stick it on Spotify or whatever, but getting anybody to actually spend some time and listen to what you've done is not easy. The tail is goes on forever.
And as you know, I've just spent 2 years writing a book, and that's about to go to market. It's actually going to start to go to market next week. And I'll be honest.
Okay, for listeners who can read, which I think is about 1 in 3. What's it called?
It's called Full Bleed.
Full Bleed, and sell it. You have 30 seconds. It's as an advertising man to sell your book.
It's remarkable stories and hard-won lessons from the coalface's creativity and the bleeding edge of advertising and technology. It's all the things that you wanted to know about creativity that I've been brave enough to go and ask or to find out. It's 30 years of a creative life distilled into 260 pages for your enjoyment. My lessons, my fuck ups, and my hard work packaged in a way that's enjoyable for you.
Okay, how do you get it?
It's on pre-order now, Amazon, and the physical edition. So it's on pre-order now until October the 28th, when it will be released as a Kindle edition. It will be on sale as a physical edition by then in New Zealand in a relatively limited way, and it will be for sale as an NFT from the middle of next week, from October the 13th. And I think the point I was going to share, Paul, was that, I spent 2 years writing a book, following that process, I actually found really enjoyable and loved every single moment of it. And it was relatively non-technological. So it was just pure thinking, pure writing, pure shaping, over and over again until you're happy with something. And then more recently, the last 2 or 3 months have been, okay, so how do you build an audience for this book? We decimate millions of trees to make books that nobody reads. Amazon is full of millions of books that nobody ever hears of. And so, yes, it's never been easier to write and publish a book. It's never been harder to get the audience for the book. And I spent the last three months, just as I have done for every other client in my career, writing the ads, making the ads, putting together the marketing plan, building the PR story, the narrative, and all the necessary things around the book, so that when it does go to market, there will be a campaign around the book that people do get to see. I'm not going to try and sell this thing on word of mouth alone. It ain't going to work. Do you know what I mean? Lesson for all clients. Word of mouth's great. If you can get it, you have to advertise. People have to know about your product in a really fucking interesting way, so they might go and consider buying it. Now, you can wrap as many layers as you like on that onion, but you have to do that. And then you have to throw in the really unexpected moments in the campaign, which is, the fuck me moments. That's interesting. The talkable moments whereby people suddenly go, shit, that's interesting enough for me to go and do something about it. So I spent the last three months getting all those pieces together, which will be coming out soon to promote and market and sell the book, according to all the principles that you and I know, according to all the principles that I've become accustomed to at Facebook and and everything else. You can't rely, on the existence of the it alone,
Yeah, you can't just create it. You got to sell the bloody
And
thing.
that's been the fucking, been the complex and challenging bit. The book was fun. The marketing bit is the fucking hard bit. That's
okay. There's a lesson for you kids. Now, this podcast will probably take a week or so to put together. So I expect that by the time it is released, your book, Andy, will be out and about. So go and check it out on Amazon, and hopefully, if you order a copy, it won't take too long to be delivered.
one of the interesting things about, while we are we're bogged down by COVID, and the real world does grind to a halt, but the digital world races on. And, I left Facebook to publish a book. I didn't mean that to happen on practically day one of Auckland, New Zealand going into lockdown again. And what that did for me was to spend the last 5 or 6 weeks completely immersed in the digital world of blockchain and NFTs, which happened to provide a really fortunate, in terms of timing, ability to explore something brand new in terms of how can you go to market with something as well known as a book, and which is where the idea of selling the book as an NFT came into play. And most people would, if they think of NFTs at all, and most people don't, they're probably aware of $1 million sums for artwork that looks like a JPEG or a GIF. Huge sums are being traded globally for what looks like often a hastily conceived piece of digital art. But if you look a little bit deeper than that in terms of what the blockchain itself can offer and what NFTs themselves can offer by way of proof of ownership or digital authentication of a work of art, whatever that is, whatever it may be, then you can really begin to open some interesting ideas. And the idea that you can sell a book as an NFT, and thereby, what you're selling is digital ownership of that item in the digital realm, does raise some really interesting questions, which is basically, what are you selling then? Are you selling a book? Are you selling this book as a work of art, or are you selling this book as an item which is transferring the publishing rights to its new owner? All of those things or none of those things. And that's also what we're going to try and do next week, because we're selling the book in 3 forms as NFTs, the master version, an edited version, and a super short version, which confer the right of publishing to the NFT owner, just to explore a different way of going to market with something as traditional as a book.
So if somebody buys the NFT of your book, does that mean if there's I guess with Amazon you don't have print runs, but does it mean that from there on they get all the proceeds from the sale?
Well, what I've decided to do is confer, and you don't have to do this, but you can confer. I've decided to confer publishing rights as part of the NFT. Now, not all NFTs have royalties built into them, but some of them do. I think the vernacular is smart contracts, and the NFTs I'm using through a platform called Litho, which is launching on October the 13th, is using a royalty system. So the secondary market for NFTs is actually bigger than the primary market. So the on-selling of something, and thereby the original owner receives royalties, can be, a future long tail of income to do with the item itself, be that a piece of art or be that a book or whatever. So yes, you can choose to do that. Yeah. Yeah. So it's a brand new system of publishing. And I think whether anybody will understand that or not, or, come to understand that in 2 or 3 years, perhaps, is, part of the interesting reason for doing it.
Part of the wonder of the universe. I guess you'll find out in time.
Yeah. So by the next time we meet, Paul, we'll probably have an answer to that.
Okay, we got about 8 years before our next meeting, so we shall dig it up and see how we go. Hey, cheers, Andy. Go well.
Thank you, Paul.
Stay safe.
Yes.
Good luck with the book.
I enjoyed it. It was a pleasure. Thanks, mate.
On the farewell drive, we found 100 ways that our hands fit together. Centrifugal force pulls us apart. Please forgive my trembling hands, crudely silhouetted by the flickering spires of candlelight, while the wicked sleep sound, the anxious toss and turn, thoughts come not as single spies, but in battalions, while the wicked sleep sound, the anxious toss and turn. And it's at times like these that we understand our Father's fascination with dendrology. The family tree is losing its leaves. Please forgive my trembling hands, crudely silhouetted by the flickering spires of candlelight. While the wicked sleep sound, the anxious toss and turn, thoughts come not as single spies, but in battalions. While the wicked sleep sound, the anxious toss and turn.